Hello, everyone. Hope you guys are doing well. Let me know if you guys can hear me in the chat. Once again, I'm on vacation, so hopefully the setup is fine. Hopefully we can manage. I've changed from the circle to the box structure, so huge improvement, obviously, on the quality of life of the stream and the visuals. Hopefully, but I hope you guys are all doing well on this fine day here, Game Week 1, the deadline. A lot of people talk about FOMO in the chat. Um, Couple people have joined and rejoined actually as members of the channel. So Jay Wavy, Tony Harrison, Nikhil, Hakon as well. Hopefully that's how you pronounce your name. Thank you all for joining as members of the channel, rejoining as well. Amazing that you guys are here. I'm really glad that we could actually be here for the deadline for the stream. So this is my team as it stands. I've cut off, I guess, half the head of Henderson, but he's still there. I think the only change that I might actually make with my goalkeepers is something of the sort, right? I think I might just go Bentley. I could go Matthews as well, but I don't really, I don't really care, to be quite honest. So that's one spot that I'm somewhat concerned about. Not an actual concern though, of course. So that's sort of the sentiment right now. Yeah. So that's the main point. I have obviously swapped off of Rogers and Barco in recent memory, but I think people going Rogers and Barco, it still works really well, particularly with the wildcard 6 landscape. It's not like Konsa, Trent, and Porro can't just carry your defense for the most part. So you really need two options in Konsa and Barco to completely capitulate to be, I think, a little bit worse off than this draft. But I'm still sort of planning for all the eventualities here with this draft structure, and so that's why I've gone with Dunk in this situation. And as I said, I don't really think there's a huge difference. It's just two players and two rather insignificant players. I know a lot of people are very, very high on Rodgers, but the reality I think is that I would probably be only playing Rodgers in Game Week 3 in the previous draft structure, and now here I'll have to survive with Joao Pedro in Game Week 3, which is not so good. But then considering that I have a lot of value placed around Joao Pedro as an asset, I don't really mind having a slightly worse Game Week 3 because my Game Week 4 will also be stronger, right? Knowing that Dunk is nailed for Game Week 4 means that I will definitely have a strong defense for that game week, which is also a poor game week, unfortunately, for Pedro Porro, which is the idea behind that. Hope you guys are doing well. Henry, member for 28 months, a president of the channel, could be compared to Florentino Perez. Thank you so much for rejoining as a member. Really appreciate it. How do the subs work compared to Euro Fantasy? So the substitutions in FPL are actually they don't even do anything really. So it really comes down to if you have a player in your starting 11 who is not playing, you will get an auto substitution. So whoever's first on your bench will come on. Now, the formations are restricted to, let's say, having three at the back. So let's say if you have a defender, let's say you've got Guardiola, he's magically injured or he's got some sort of illness before game week 1, he doesn't actually turn up for the fixture, then your auto substitution will not necessarily just be your first auto sub. So that could be a midfielder, but it will actually be the first auto substitution within a legal formation. So in that situation, it would be a defender auto sub, just to allow you to have three at the back at the bare minimum. Is this my locked in final team? A couple people asking that in the chat. Generally speaking, yes. Nice to see a lot of you guys in the chat. Jay Wavy, La Luna, nice. Smith Rowe or Joao Pedro. I prefer Joao Pedro just because Winks, I find, is a much stronger auto sub than any of the 4.5 forwards. And I think that Joao Pedro really isn't too far behind Smith Rowe. As I said, if you consider the entire trajectory of game weeks 1 to 5, why have Valdemarsson versus Bentley as a second keeper? I don't think it really matters, to be quite honest with you. I can't see why it even matters. I could go Bentley now, and I don't think it matters at all. I could even go Matthews, but then that would sort of lock me up to triple Palace, which is not necessarily something that I really want for right now. Which is, exactly why you can see I don't have Henderson and Matthews. You defo keeping Bentley. Look, guys, this is the most irrelevant pick in the draft, the 4.0 goalkeeper, because someone will get injured potentially, and hopefully it's not Henderson. Why Kwanzaa over Hall? I just think that Liverpool's run of games over game weeks 1 to 5 is worth punting on. And given that Hall's position in the team is a little bit shaky, like let's say if they sign Guehi, I wouldn't be 100% sure that Hall gets 5 starts. Why don't I consider an Arsenal defender? I'm sort of planning for a wildcard 6. So that's why I don't really love the Arsenal fixtures, because I think there's arguably 3 fixtures that are somewhat poor. And I think you can even argue the same case for Man City. Why Quans over Hull? I've answered that already. No Arsenal defense, just answer that as well. Thoughts on Wood? I think Wood is really good for game weeks 1 to 3. The best 6 million forward, I think it comes down to Wood is the best forward for, let's say, game weeks 1 to 3. Muniz, for me, is the better forward for game weeks 1 to 5, because when you look at the run of games for, let's say, Nottingham Forest versus Fulham, the game week 4 fixture does stick out as a rather poor one for Chris Wood. Whereas with Muniz, if you actually believe that his minutes are very strong, which I think they are, ultimately the run of games, as I said, between game weeks 1 to 5 for Fulham are the better ones. Havertz or Solanke for the opening 2. I would probably actually lean with... I'd actually probably lean with Solanke. I'd probably go Havertz, actually. I'd probably go Havertz. I just think that the Wolves at home fixture is so good for Havertz, and game week 2 is minutes should still be really strong. I have no concerns over that, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. I still favor the Arsenal offense, over the Spurs offense. Brother, best 5 billion defender, I think it's Munoz, or Munoz, however you want to say it, from Crystal Palace. Why Dunk over Robinson? Ultimately, I wanted Dunk to play in game week 4. So if you kind of look at my team, right, it's very clear that Kwanzaa's minutes could drop at around game weeks 3 to 4, I would say. And so I wanted options like Konsa, like Dunk, who actually have really good fixtures game weeks 3 to 5. Now, Robinson's best fixture, in my opinion, is game week 2. That's very nice, but I think Fulham's defense is much worse than still a team like Brighton. So I quite like having Dunk as an option here within my team. Murphy or Smith Rowe? I think I'd still back Smith Rowe. I think his minutes are going to be a little bit more permanent, because with Murphy, yes, of course, great preseason, but is he going to be nailed for the entire run of games that you really want? I'd probably say Smith Rowe is better for that, even though he's building up his match fitness. The Flying Naga, thank you so much for being a member for 3 months, also as a president. Without Olise and Mateta having just returned, are we overrating Eze to perform? Won't it be easier for teams to shut down Eze? I mean, Mateta's already back, right? And it's not like they've not replaced Olise at all. They've had Kamada and Sar, some attacking depth as well, that actually improve the squad. It's not like we're looking at a team that has no Olise with no replacements, right? So I think Kamada is still a very good option. We also have to ultimately say that a lot of the Crystal Palace players are very valuable, because we have seen great sort of production really under Glasner. And as I said, Mateta's back too. So you're really losing out on Olise, and then asking yourself the question of whether Eze's worth it. And I have to say, he's got so much still in his tool set as long as he's a Crystal Palace player. He has penalties, really good open play stats. When I looked into the shot on target per 90 numbers for all the midfielders, Eze was actually comfortably top 5. So he's a shot spammer, which leads to things like rebound assists. It also leads to things, generally speaking, like potential additional BPS, which leads to more bonus points. So I do still like Eze a lot. You can argue that game week 1's a worse fixture, but we're picking players here ultimately for multiple game weeks at a time, not just 1 or 2. And so with Mateta probably starting in game week 2, I don't really have any concerns with Eze. Try not to spam the chat, sorry. S is saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to put you in timeout, because the whole point is that everyone wants to be able to ask questions in the chat at the same time. 1,300 of you guys in the chat. Thank you guys so much for being here, by the way. I really, really appreciate it. MPass87 member for 5 months, also a president. New season hype. Invaluable preseason content, you're the man. 4.5 defender plus Pedro, or 4.0 defender plus Muniz. Personally, I would still go with the 4.5 defender plus Pedro. And that's partially because it's my draft, but I also think that with someone like Muniz, he's got great fixtures, but then 1 to 5, I still ultimately would like to have someone like Joao Pedro. So then the question I suppose I'd be asking back to you is, do you value game weeks 1 to 3 a lot more? And therefore, I would probably go with Muniz in that situation. Or are you planning for a little bit of a longer term trajectory? So if you're planning for a little bit of a longer term trajectory, I would still prefer the 4.5 defender plus Pedro, but it's a very close call, because if you guys remember my updated draft video a couple days ago, I did heavily consider going for Muniz as well, and the 4.0 simulation. A lot of people ask about Jota in the chat. My concern with Jota is not that he's going to start or not for game weeks 1. By the way, Jordan Speller as well with a super chat. Bench boost game week 1, wild card game week 2. Not sure what 4.5 game goalkeeper and defender to go for. Already have 3 Arsenal, Newcastle, Liverpool. Jordan, I would still go with Flecken ultimately, right? He's got a great home fixture here in game week 1. Out of all the 4.5 goalkeepers, he's probably the goalkeeper that I would back the most within this specific game week. So he would be the one for me. I mean, let me have a quick just recast of all the 4.5 goalkeepers who actually have a decent fixture this week. Why not? The one thing I would say about Crystal Palace, for example, is that they're still playing away from home, right? I tentatively just still like to back teams that are actually playing at home. And for me, I think it would be Flecken or Sells, right? Coming down to it, actually. But we don't really know whether Flecken's going to start. I think actually Steele, Jason Steele could be quite interesting. It's Everton. And if there's one thing we can say about Everton, they're a little bit more defensively tilted, right? So arguably you can go for Steele. If you really want to go for a differential, Jason Steele is definitely interesting, I would say. But if you want to go with a little bit more of a standard one, I don't have any issues with you just simply going for what we talked about there in terms of going for Flecken here with the home fixture. Anish, thank you as well for being a member for 9 months. Really, really appreciate that. And thank you once again, Jordan, for the super chat. Kwanzaa, Hall, Guardiola, Paul, Robinson, midfield, Son, Saka, Salah, Bruno, Kamada, forward, Wood, Muniz, Isak. I think that team is lovely, right? And this is once again an illustration of how strong, the Salah-only teams are. Ultimately, you're looking at a player here who gives you a little bit more depth compared to a Haaland-only draft, and you have the depth within your defense. So I don't really have any suggestions other than the fact that I don't really love Kamada. I think his minutes could still be a bit dicey, but who knows? If Eze suddenly leaves the team, then I think Kamada is actually an even better option because I think that his minutes are a little bit more secure. So if you really want Kamada to be sort of your differential pick, I think that's fine because it's sort of your depth piece, right? Ultimately, the other picks in your team, you're playing more consistently. I would prefer a little bit more of a well-rounded draft in terms of not having Son, Saka, and Salah, because the one thing I'd say about that is when you look at the midfield and you go for Son, Salah, and Saka, it's kind of hard to captain the options you want. I think just by having Salah and Saka, you cover most of the captaincies, right? Salah's bad game week is game week 3. Saka's good game week is game week 3 as well, where he gets to play Brighton at home. So I think that already kind of covers the run of games. If you prefer Son over Saka, then go for Son over Saka. But then I think you can actually still save a little bit more money. You can even go for someone like Trent within your team. And I think, why not? Fran, why not go Bruno to Brereton? You can upgrade to Raya, Muniz, and Gabriel. Why not do this? That's what my team looks like. Well, I'm not going to upgrade my team just to make it yours. And personally, I still prefer my team, if I'm being honest. But that's because I'm planning for a wildcard 6. So when I look at Arsenal's fixtures and I'm going for Raya and Gabriel, my issue with going with Raya and Gabriel is I still have to deal with, first of all, an Aston Villa fixture, a Tottenham fixture, and then a Man City fixture over the 3 run of games out of 5. And so when I look back at my own team, I don't really mind having a 4.5. It's a sacrifice for sure. But then Bruno is a massive, really stable pick that you don't really mind playing week to week. With Bertrand Diaz, he actually has great XG per 90. It's not like he's on penalties, though, and he's not on set pieces. So I do think that there's a big gulf, of course, there. Muniz is definitely better than Joao Pedro. I can put my hands up and say that when it comes to game weeks 1 to 3, even game weeks 1 to 5. But that's sort of the consolation, I suppose, of certain drafts. If you were going for something like wildcard 4, it would make a lot more sense for me to go double Arsenal defense. But for me, on a wildcard 6, I wouldn't really go for a double Arsenal defense. If I was ever to go Arsenal defense, I'd probably just go Gabriel. Conrad Lamb, thank you for your super chat as well. And thank you, Marco, as well for your super chat. I really do appreciate it. Guardiola Porro. Good question, Conrad. I mean, I think it comes down to whether you actually have that 0.5 to spend. Another question as well is, when you have Porro, you need to look at when Porro has bad fixtures. Porro has a bad fixture in game week 4. When you look at Guardiola, when does he have technically bad fixtures? Arguably game week 1, maybe game week 3, if you really think that West Ham have really improved as a team, and I think it's fair to say that they have. Rodri is also missing for game week 1. And then game week 5 is arguably a bad one because it's the Arsenal fixture. Although you can argue that we've seen a lot of precedent to say that Arsenal versus Man City games are very, very hard to score within. But anyways, going back to the point, I do really think that Porro is very, very strong for the opening run of games. I don't really mind just simply going for Porro. I also feel that his minutes are absolutely secure. Whilst I think Guardiola's minutes are secure now, you never can say the same for the future. So I still like Porro, knowing that you're going to spend 0.5 wisely. So that's my answer. 1,600 of you guys in the chat. This is absolutely insane. If you guys could like the stream, subscribe, I would absolutely appreciate it. I'm completely over the moon. The preseason has been absolutely amazing. So thank you guys so much for supporting the content. And I'm really, really glad you guys are here. A lot of people asking in the chat, Gordon or Eze. And I think the answer to that is, if you think Eze has a huge doubt of going to Man City, I believe the bookies odds are something like 30-35% chance for him to leave. Then, of course, Gordon makes a lot more sense. A lot of people are asking questions as well about Jota. And the questions about Jota are really about why I'm not going for Jota. My concern with Jota is not that he's not going to start game weeks 1 to 2, but rather that in terms of game weeks 3 and 4, I don't know how many minutes Darwin's going to take from him. Who knows that Jota would definitely be starting between game weeks 1 to 5. So if for me, Jota's minutes can decline very quickly, I would rather have assets like Bruno where I don't really need to force a transfer unless I absolutely have to. 2 super chats, one from Bob first. Thank you so much. Let's have a look at Bob's question. So Bob's question is, have you considered Jota for Joao Pedro? Exactly what I've sort of been discussing. By downgrading Porro plus Dunk, BPS is worse for defenders this season. I mean, Bob, I've already looked into the sort of data for the BPS, right? And ultimately, we're talking about a 1 to 5% change for most of the defenders and most of the premium defenders in specific. On top of that as well, you're looking at defenders not really being impacted by being premium defenders. The class of defenders that actually get hurt the most, I suppose, are teams that are weaker defenses. And I think that's a fair point to sort of criticize Porro for. I think he was someone who actually dropped 7% in terms of revisiting last season's total points. But then you also have to kind of actually look at, once you've taken away those points from Porro, is he still an efficient asset? And is he still a price efficient asset? So when I looked at the data last season, what I noticed with Porro and players like Trent and even Guardiola is that even if you take away the bonus points that they would have lost last season, if you replayed the matches of football with the BPS changes, the defenders, for the most part, are still much better in terms of price points than some of the midfielders in the game, unless we're talking about the likes of Eze, who are really, really good, and Nkunku as well with good minutes. So arguably, defense has been as strong as ever. And part of that is because I think when you look at a player like, let's say, Porro, he's arguably still a little bit underpriced compared to some of the other options, because he's an absolutely nailed player, can take set pieces for around 15 to 25 minutes per game, has a good run of games, generally speaking, to start. But if you also believe in the narratives, let's say, that this Tottenham team has been always a lot better when they actually have their full strength team, which is the reality now, I still think he's a good pick. And so, once again, because I don't really like dealing with the Jota X-Men's gamble, which is basically, okay, fine, he starts game week 1, probably starts game week 2, up to him to lose his spot, but he can lose his spot because there's really good depth within Liverpool, and Darwin's obviously there. He's not a joke. So, slightly early substitutions are possible too for Jota anyways, and so I don't really want to deal with that situation, and I'd rather have the team that I have in place. With Joao Pedro, you can argue that he's an X-Men's gamble as well, but he's an X-Men's gamble for 5.5 million, who's also a penalty taker. So I don't really mind spending that sort of money for Joao Pedro. Jay Wavy's question is having 2 goalkeepers rotation important? You're currently on Flecken right now and wondering if you should stick with that. I think it comes back down to the question of whether you enjoy having 0.5 and you don't have anywhere to spend it. If you have an additional 0.5, I really like the Flecken Henderson rotation. I've even seen something like, I don't know, Flecken and McCarthy as well. But personally, I would much prefer Flecken and Henderson for now. Even if Guehi's to leave the club for Crystal Palace, I still think that they've actually signed depth for Guehi too, so I'm not really concerned about Crystal Palace for the time being. And I can't imagine that they would sell both Anderson and Guehi. That's out of the question for me. So to answer your question, J-Wave, I actually think that it comes down to your personal preference, whether you want to spend 0.5 million on a goalkeeper. Some managers like spending 5.5 million on a goalkeeper. Some people like having Ederson, Raya, Allison, right? Even when you consider the run of games specifically for game weeks 1 to 5. So it's really up to you. But yeah, comes down to some people have a personal preference that they just want to spend the bare minimum for goalkeepers, which I think is totally fine, because it means that you're spending as much money in the outfield, let's say 13, as much as possible. And it's quite easy to rotate in between them. By the way, 1,750 of you guys in the chat. We're breaking records every minute now. So thank you guys. If you guys could like and subscribe, that would absolutely make the day for me. Tiggy, I'm so sorry. I only got to this now. You've gifted 5 memberships to the chat. Let's actually see who's gotten the memberships in the chat. Let me quickly have a look. And I'll get to all the other super chats as well. Are we able to actually see who got the super chats, or rather who got the memberships? I can't really see who's gotten them. I am so sorry. But once again, thank you so much, Tiggy, and congratulations to all the new members in the channel. Hope you guys shout out Tiggy in the chat as well for being so gracious as well. All right, back to some super chats. So La Luna, Fran, you're my FPL hero. No, I really appreciate that. But I mean, we have some great FPL sort of content creators and tools as well in the space in FPL. So definitely, it is not something where I just work alone. So that's all I'll say. Thank you so much, Andrew, with your super chat. Minte or Hudson-Odoi? I personally prefer Minte. But once again, I'll ask the question of what are you planning for? Are you planning for Hudson-Odoi for a game week 1 to 3 angle, or are you planning for someone like Minte for a game week 1 to 5 angle? Because I personally prefer someone like Minte over Hudson-Odoi over the game weeks 1 to 5 trajectory and beyond, as opposed to Hudson-Odoi, who's probably actually a better pick between game weeks 1 to 3 compared to Minte, right? Because if you think about Minte's fixtures, game weeks 1 to 3, you've got arguably one good game, which is the Man United home game, but then you also have Arsenal in there. So it's quite tough if you just look at a shortened horizon for Minte. Mal as well in the chat. Thank you so much for being a member as well. Best of luck for the season, Fran. Which combo of three would you prefer? Hall, Saka, and Muniz, or Porro, Eze, Havertz, and Porro, Odegaard, and Muniz? I'm going to have to look at that again. Which combo of three? So Hall, Saka, and Muniz. Okay. Porro, Eze, and Havertz. Porro, Odegaard, and Muniz. You know what's interesting is a lot of people have been asking me about why I have Saka in my draft. And I think the answer to why I have Saka in my draft is simply because I would like to have Saka in my draft so that I can actually rotate the premiums at around game weeks 4 or game week 5. If you look at game week 5, that's clearly a bad window for the captaincy on this current draft structure. I kind of need to get Salah into the team. I would like him to be my captain for game week 5. So then my view of why I've gone for Saka is simply because I want to actually be able to pivot into Salah through Saka in that week. And when it comes to game week 5, I don't really necessarily need Isak at the time. Maybe I'd be willing to also drop Haaland for Watkins as well. So that's kind of my thought on that. So that's why I think if you can go for Saka, I'd probably go for it. I'm not sure if Hall's minutes are absolutely nailed, particularly since they seem very close to the Guehi deal. But generally speaking, that's why I'd prefer Saka over, let's say, a nomium variation, which just has Haaland. So I hope that sort of answers your question. But if you don't really care about that, as I said, arguably the three selection of players for Eze, Havertz, and Porro looks the most striking to me. Muniz plus Rogers, Dimitris, as well, thank you for your super chat. Muniz plus Rogers over Pedro plus Winks, you think is a mistake. I'm not really sure what you mean, though, because Muniz plus Rogers is surely 1 million more than Pedro plus Winks, right? I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean Pedro plus Rogers is better than Muniz plus Winks, or do you want to rephrase your question? Marco says, can we get a bargain player of the year prediction? So are we talking about like a cheaper player? I mean, I'd have to put my money on Nkunku. He's in my draft. I hope he gets the minutes from Enzo. But we have a player who arguably could be world class as long as he gets minutes and doesn't get injured again. So I would have to say I'd probably put my money on Nkunku. Anish, which Arsenal midfielder would you suggest in place of Saka? I personally would not go for an Arsenal midfielder in place of Saka. If you don't really want to go for Saka, I can't see why you'd want to go for someone unless you're going for wildcard 4. If you're going for wildcard 4, I don't really mind Odegaard at all. I probably wouldn't go for any other Arsenal midfielder if I'm being completely honest. Ali Hussein, the season's about to kick off. Absolutely it is. So pleasure to have you guys all in the chat. 1,800 of you guys. This is absolutely crazy. So do like the stream though whilst you're here. Do you think Pedro's minutes are at risk due to Jota? I think a little bit, right? But I don't think Joao Pedro is suddenly going to be someone who's going to be starting off the bench, if that makes sense. He also can play minutes where Welbeck is playing in the center forward position. So when you look at someone like Joao Pedro, he's not necessarily going to be threatened in the sense that he's going to be playing 25, 30 minutes of football. It's more so the case that maybe because they now have a lot of depth in different positions, and particularly with Ferguson maybe working his way back to full fitness, that Joao Pedro is never going to be more than, let's say, 75 to 80 minutes a game, which obviously is a bit of risky territory. But I still think that he's very clearly a top player for this team, and there shouldn't really be too many concerns about Joao Pedro and his minutes in terms of him consistently starting games. If you actually think that there's some better options, like let's say Muniz, like let's say Wood, maybe even Armstrong, who have better minutes at the start, I totally understand that, and I think you can go for that. I still like going for Joao Pedro, though, because I think he still is a penalty taker, which is not something I can really say for Muniz right now, maybe not even Wood. And for Armstrong, obviously, he's a penalty taker, but then you also have to take into account the quality of the different offenses between Brighton and Southampton. Dusty Birdman says, squad is Raya, Fabianski, Trent, Kwanzaa, Barco, Robinson, Eze, Gordon, Nkunku, Saka, Winks, Haaland. I love that draft. As I said, if you guys want to go for a Muniz draft, you don't really care about having that last 4.5 defender that I have in place. You want to go for Muniz plus Barco, totally fine. I think that draft structure is great. And it goes back to my updated draft video a couple days ago where I was definitely considering that structure. And I think they're all really close, right? Even going back to, let's say, Rogers plus Barco, I don't really mind that at all if you want to go for that. So all these drafts, in my opinion, are very, very strong. They have minimal differences, but they're really, really... I do think that they kind of hit the sort of price point correctly in terms of game week 1 for just different sort of draft structures. Edzo, hey Fran, thanks for the content. Good luck this season. Good luck to you as well, Edzo. Thank you so much. Krishan as well, welcome as a member of the channel. Really appreciate you joining and supporting here. Thank you and welcome to Manager once again. All right, going back to chat now. A lot of people asking questions like Smith Rowe and Nkunku, thoughts on Mavididi. I actually really like Mavididi, right? Just to touch on Mavididi. The reason why a lot of people are looking into Mavididi is because we know that there are 2 injuries that are quite key to the Leicester City squad. We know that Vardy's injured, and that seems to be a couple of weeks. And then we know that Doku is actually out for a couple of months. Remember that he was actually stretchered off the field, so it's a very serious injury. So it seems like Leicester might still be going into the market for a center forward, but it's way too far out now, in my opinion, to stop really Mavididi from playing maybe center forward in game week 1 and maybe 2, and for him to take penalties as well for the foreseeable future. So I actually think Mavididi is a very, very shrewd pick, 100%. And it's really up to you, because arguably when you look at game week 1 now, when you revisit the fixture, and game week 3, those are really good Leicester fixtures. As far as Smith Rowe versus Nkunku, I have to say that I still vouch a lot for Nkunku, and I still think very highly of him. Yes, of course, it seems like Chelsea are absolutely padded with depth across the board. But when you look at some of the sort of season-long betting projections, he is a very, very crazy pick. And I feel like we're definitely overshooting too much if we're just going to be willing to, I guess, drop Nkunku from our teams for that. If you really do think that Nkunku's minutes are severely threatened, like let's say you think that Nkunku is someone who can very easily lose minutes and maybe even be a bench option, then there's no reason to go Nkunku. You just go for Smith Rowe there, because I think Smith Rowe definitely doesn't have that sort of same quality of competition. But I'd maybe even be willing to make the same argument for Nkunku, because I think him and Palmer are two players that should be permanent starters for the team, regardless of the fact that Chelsea have a lot of depth right now. So that's sort of my sentiments, but I don't think it's okay to go off of some of these options. I don't have any leaks right now, but I think it's worth probably me actually scavenging Twitter a little bit for potential leaks. Why not? Because we always do tend to have a couple leaks for the deadline, but we only have a Man United game for now, so that is a big piece of information, right? So, okay, it seems like Lazy FPL have actually hit us up with the leak, so let's just quickly have a look at Lazy FPL. It seems like the news that we've gotten is actually that Amad Diallo starts for Man United. So, my assumption in this case is if Amad starts, then it probably means that both Garnacho and Rashford are starting. Because I think one thing that the Community Shield told us is that someone like Rashford is still a very important player to this Man United team. I wouldn't think any differently of Rashford. However, we know that Xerxes is not really match fit. So what I would probably say is that it seems likely that we'll have Rashford maybe up top, maybe Bruno up top as well. But I still really see it as a case of Bruno within the midfield, probably with Casemiro and Mainu. And then you've got Garnacho probably on the left wing position, Amad on the right wing position, and then maybe we're going to see Rashford centre forward. So does that make you any more interested in Rashford, guys, in the chat? Because I think my issue with Amad is even though he starts game week 1, he's going to be interesting for the managers who are going for that sort of bench boost option for game week 1, right? Because he's a very cheap access to a good home fixture for Man United. But beyond that, I still think that his risks are very clearly there. With Højlund and Xerxes coming back into the team, I do think Amad is the player who most likely will lose his spot compared to Rashford and Garnacho. So I still don't like starting the season with Amad, even though we got this leak. But yeah. What do you guys think in the chat about Amad Diallo? Thoughts on Lewis Hall instead of Kwanzaa? I mean, I don't really mind Lewis Hall at all personally, but as I said, I think that Lewis Hall's minutes can also be quite susceptible. And then it's a case of whether you actually think that Newcastle have a better run of games 1 to 5, because I think they're an inferior defense to, let's say, Liverpool's defense. So that's a big piece of information as well. I try not to spam the chat too. Yazan said, Nkunku Eze was asked in the chat. I'd probably back Nkunku first because it seems like at least he's going to stay within the team. With Eze, you can say that there's a bit of doubt, so I'd go Nkunku personally. Chiseled Planet as well gave 5 memberships to the chat, so congratulations to the 5 of you guys who got membership. I can see Matt Duncan got membership, so do shout out Chiseled Planet on your way. Thank you so much for being so gracious too. So Tiggy and Chiseled Planet, thank you guys so much for giving memberships to the chat. Anish also asking a question with the super chat here. Let me have a look. Sorry. So, actually, I've missed 2 super chats. So, JW says, "What's the best 4 million defender?" I still think it's Barco in terms of the upside. But look, in reality, you probably want a nailed player, and I can't think that Harwood Bellis is like. Let's say if you really wanted, if you already know that your team lacks a bit of depth, and you know that in a few game weeks team you might actually have to call upon your depth if auto subs are needed, then I guess Harwood Bellis is probably your best option, right? Compared to, let's say, Barco potentially, but I would probably still go for Barco if you really want to have a 4.0 in your draft, and that's sort of my position on Barco. Anish says, who would be better from game week 2, Foden or Palmer? I personally would actually say Foden. Because if you can get a Foden start versus Ipswich at home, I think that's just a ridiculous fixture. Like, when I look at, let's say, Palmer's fixture run, it's very good from game week 2 onwards. But then, does he have a fixture that is as good or golden, really, as Ipswich at home? Probably not. So I'd say Foden. Also knowing that that 1 million can actually get you some sort of value as well within your draft and your team structure. Moncel as well, the super chat. How do you feel about Bruno to Eze, Winks to Smith Rowe? I think that makes sense because if you're going for Eze and you're, let's say, maybe a little bit doubtful of his, like, let's say his availability, if he joins something like Man City, then at least you've got someone in your draft who actually provides you quite a bit of depth in Smith Rowe over the run of games as well. How about NDIA, Everton in place of Pedro? I've got no interest in him unless Dominic Calvert-Lewin actually leaves the club. I know that there's been a rumor that Dominic Calvert-Lewin can leave in this transfer window, but we're talking about a player here who doesn't have penalties versus a player who does have penalties, and then also it's just about a quality option plus the minutes. Watkins or Solanke? I'd probably actually go Solanke for now. I think that cost saving is nice. I'm not sure if Watkins actually starts for game week 1. It's very likely that he could start game week 1, but then what I'd have to say about Watkins is if he's had 0 preseason minutes whatsoever, how likely is Watkins going to play 90 minutes of football? I still think that he's going to be a 65-minute substitution in the best case, right? I don't know if you guys have the same thoughts on that. So I'd probably go for Solanke. And I'd also probably stop spamming the chat. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to put you in timeout, my friend. All right. Apologies about that, but has to be done. No spam in the chat if possible, guys. Why Nkunku instead of Bailey? I think generally speaking, as I said, I do think that Nkunku is still a higher quality player than Bailey in terms of when you look at if Nkunku can get a similar amount of minutes to Bailey, probably a little bit less than Bailey, is he a better player potentially? I think, yes, you can argue that they're in a better offense. Yes, Aston Villa are a Champions League team and Bailey's on set pieces, but I have to say that I would still probably back Nkunku a little bit more in terms of that goal threat value. Because when you look at Bailey, he's very XA dominant, and part of that is the set pieces and just how creative he is, generally speaking. But then when it comes to being a direct goal threat, I think Nkunku definitely does trump Bailey a little bit, and that's why I still would favor someone like Nkunku for the meantime. And when you look at the season-long betting projections as well, you'll notice that someone like Bailey definitely has much worse projections than, let's say, Nkunku in terms of the overall goal involvement. And that obviously is going to take into account injury risk and things like that too, because Bailey is also someone who is rather injury prone too. Rodgers or Smith Rowe? I think Rodgers as an 8th attacker makes a lot of sense. Smith Rowe is probably the player that I'd actually rather have in my team as a 7th attacker. So if you don't really want to rotate too much, I'd probably back someone like Smith Rowe overall. But if you want Rodgers just as the 8th pick, totally fine to just do that instead. Is Mazraoui starting? I'm not sure. I don't have leaks on Man United, but I'd have to assume that I think he does start. Why Joao Pedro once again? I think I'm backing Joao Pedro for the overall run of games, which is game weeks 1 to 5. Why did I remove Sanchez? I removed him a long time ago, and I think my concern is that he could lose his spot to Jorgensen. But going back to the Joao Pedro point, I think, as I said, I prefer Joao Pedro over game weeks 1 to 5. I don't really mind sticking on Joao Pedro. I still think he's the higher quality player. Both players can arguably have less minutes. Joao Pedro definitely, because there's a lot more depth in Brighton at place, or in place rather, compared to, let's say, Southampton. But once again, when you look at, let's say, some of the sort of overall season-long projections, it's quite clear who the markets think is a better player. And part of that is just an indictment of the better offense. You know, if you look at a team like, let's say, I think actually if you look traditionally speaking at some of the last few seasons, look at which teams actually draw the most penalties, it's arguably the better attacks, right? And I'd also have a general higher expectation that Brighton will also draw more penalties than a team like, let's say, Southampton. So that's sort of my thoughts as well on Joao Pedro. Thoughts on Mavididi? I think I spoke about him previously in the chat, but clearly with the injuries that are in place for Leicester, it makes him an absolutely exciting pick. So he's very, very strong for the run of games to start. And if you actually have space for a 5.5 million midfielder in your team, and also, crucially speaking, right, Leicester actually have a good home fixture in game week 1. So if you need some sort of rotation in place where you have one of the players in your team who actually you think the minutes could be susceptible, like Joao Pedro in game week 1, then of course, Mavididi can actually fill out a great job in your draft. My issue with my draft is that unless I drop in Nkunku or Eze, I find it quite hard to put Mavididi into my draft. Unless I also want to drop someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold into, I don't know, a Guardiola or a Gabriel, which is sort of my main point there. Rodgers or Smith Rowe, as I said, it really just comes down to whether you have 7th or 8th. Like, let's say whether you have Rodgers as an 8th attacker or Smith Rowe as a 7th. I personally prefer starting Smith Rowe more often than not. Why Henderson over Flecken? I just generally think that Crystal Palace are the better defensive team. And probably concede less chances per game. Now, of course, Flecken is there for the saves because that's what Brentford do. They make saves. But generally speaking, I kind of like Henderson more over game weeks 1 to 5. Jota or Gordon? I think I'd probably actually still go with Jota. Fixtures are so good. Gordon's best fixtures game week 1, where it seems like his minutes are the riskiest, but it seems like, look, when we looked at Gordon at any time, we know that Gordon's minutes are close to perfect. So I think he might be eased in a little bit because you've already got someone like, let's say, Barnes within the team. So generally speaking, I'm happy with, let's say, going for Jota if you want to take that sort of punt there for Jota. Is Bentley a starter? No, he's not a starter. There are no starting 4.0 goalkeepers in the team. I don't have any prize leagues right now. Apologies about that. Jota starts. Did anybody leak Jota starts, or have I missed something here? I think it's very obvious that Jota starts, by the way. I don't think that really changes my mind on any of the sort of players. But yeah. I'm just going to quickly have a look at chat to look for potential leaks. Yeah. But I don't think we've actually seen any potential leaks. So, yeah. Okay. Seems like we're in a pretty safe spot when it comes to leaks. My concern with Jota is not game week 1. My concern with Jota is probably, let's say, game weeks 3 and 4. Can Darwin start in those fixtures? I think absolutely he can. Chisel Planet, once again, coming clutch with 5 gifted memberships. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the support. You've always been a great supporter of the channel, and congratulations to players like Luke, Franek, Henry Morgan as well. Congratulations on your memberships from the chat. Darren O'Brien says, why aren't more content creators going to 4 million goalkeepers? Henderson and Sells rotate very well until game week 5. I mean, I also think that Henderson and Fleck can rotate really well, if we're being honest. But I think it's a question of what do the, I suppose, content creators value more? Do they value, let's say, having a strong goalkeeper rotation, or do they have value, let's say, having a little bit more bench depth at times? And I think that's a very close call. So I think for the goalkeeper, for people like myself who've actually just gone for 4.5 goalkeeper, tentatively speaking, I'd say that we're happy with just spending that little value in a goalkeeper. So it comes down to, once again, whether you want to spend more money on a goalkeeper in outfield position. Some people like spending 5.5 million on a goalkeeper, but I know a lot of people don't. I personally I don't love spending 5.5 million on a goalkeeper unless it's, let's say, close to the end of the season. A 5.5 goalkeeper potentially has a double game week, which means that he's just by default better. But if possible, I tend to at least spend as much money as possible within my outfield 13. And that's sort of just my point. Hey, mate, has anything happened significantly today, like injuries? No, we haven't had any major news, to be honest. I think the major news is that we've got Ahmad. Did you say Garnacho's benched? Did you say Garnacho's benched? Very interesting. Who's saying Garnacho's benched? Are we saying Lazy FPL has said that? I can't see Garnacho being benched. Who's saying that? But I hope that kind of answers your question, Darren. I really appreciate that. We had a new member as well join the channel. Welcome to Manager Amin. So really appreciate you joining here. And we've hit 2,000 live viewers. This is an absolute record for me. So really love the support. Thank you guys so much for joining here. If you guys can like the stream, that would absolutely help grow the channel, and as well subscribe if you're new here. Generally speaking, I'd say what I tend to do is I mix a lot of analytics and data within sort of the presentation of my videos and the content that I make. Obviously, I watch practically every game of football that I possibly can within the Premier League, and I also listen to the press conferences just to get an understanding of what managers are saying about, you know, players in their team, their thoughts on certain things, tactical tweaks, things like that. But try to blend a mixture of both to kind of create content. The cheat sheet series is definitely something that I'm most proud of. If you've ever watched it before, it's effectively just a running guide of all the best assets in FPL. And we sort of change that week to week because, of course, as the fixtures change, as players and their importance within their own teams change, you know, we have to reflect that. And sometimes you have to move quickly in FPL. Sometimes you have to move a little bit slower. But that's sort of what I plan to do with the channel. So Salah had a super chat as well. Salah says he's basically put the team out here. Henderson, Virgil van Dijk, Romero, Mikolenko. One thing I will say is that I still prefer the attacking fullbacks, especially if you're going to go for teams like, let's say, Liverpool and Spurs, who are definitely worse defenses than, let's say, Arsenal and Man City. I'd probably still go for the attacking fullbacks if I can. I know that we don't have news of Robertson starting. I know, arguably, with Romero, you still like him because he's actually a really good goal threat. I mean, both Virgil van Dijk and Romero are actually really good aerial threats. But going back to the point, Mikolenko, Jota, Cho, Son, Gordon, Haaland, Isak, Muniz, substitutions, Nkunku, Konsa, Robinson. I think actually you've created an extremely well-rounded team. This is a no Salah draft, which I think is fine. And probably the only player in this team who is going to be consistently benched in some weeks is probably Cho, right? The only thing I'd say about that is Cho is such a good game week 1, but then are you spending a little bit too much money on a player who effectively becomes bench depth for your team? Because I would probably play options like Muniz, Haaland, and Isak over Cho for most of the future game weeks. So do you really want to spend that sort of money on Cho? And then I guess, once again, no premium defenders in your team in terms of an attacking fullback like Trent, or at least a really strong defender for really strong defenses in Gabriel and Guardiola. And if your answer is that you personally prefer these players, then I think that's fine. I would definitely start Nkunku over Muniz because I still like the home fixture. And no Rodri, I think, is quite a significant factor as well, which allows you to probably be a bit more comfortable starting a Chelsea attacker. But I love the draft anyways. Those are my thoughts on it in terms of the pros and cons. Still think you've actually managed to come out with a really strong team, but still, once again, the differentials that you like. So congratulations. Afnan with a super chat as well. Henderson, Fabianski, Saliba, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Guardiola, Barco, Kwanzaa, Saka, and Nkunku. So this is actually pretty close to some of my previous drafts. This one has Jota as a... Look, the one thing I have to say with this draft is it's a 4-4-2, right? So I don't really like it being a 4-4-2. You have 0.5 million. I'd probably decide to spend that money on Rodgers, if I'm honest. But as I said, the one thing that I don't really love about the draft is that you've got a 4-4-2. What I would probably do is actually, I would generally consider dropping Saliba to Porro, and then you have 1 million, and then you can actually get a 5.5 million player within your team. And that's probably how I would improve the draft. But it's really up to you. If you don't really want to drop Saliba, I think that's totally fine. Your personal preference. But one of my issues is, are you happy to, let's say, play Rodgers quite consistently, and are you really going to play 4-4-2 every single week? Because there are definitely bad fixtures for some of the players. Like even Guardiola has bad fixtures. Saliba arguably has bad fixtures over this run of games. So I wouldn't be that comfortable playing a 4-4-2 consistently. CX2N gives a super chat saying, why Bruno over Jota? And for me, it comes down to things like minutes, set pieces, and penalties for Bruno. Whilst Jota's definitely starting game week 1 and probably even game week 2, my question is, how many minutes is he going to play? And do you think his minutes can be reduced by game weeks 3 and 4? And if that happens, then Jota's probably a transfer out, whereas Bruno is probably still going to remain a sort of player that within your team that doesn't have any issues. So you already sort of invest into Jota from game week 1 from the perspective of knowing that his minutes can reduce and that he's going to be a worse pick. And on top of that too, I think even though Jota might start all of these fixtures, what you're dealing with too is that Jota can still come off quite early in these games. He can be a 65-minute substitution. Yes, of course, he could be an 85-minute substitution. But I think to think so poorly of Darwin is also a little bit of an odd one for me, because I think that Darwin's probably going to be an important player for Liverpool this season. And that's sort of my take on it. I think that there's too much depth at Liverpool right now to make Jota just an immediately great pick. That is something like a season-long hold. I could be wrong on that, but I'm happy to start the season with someone who I feel doesn't really force a transfer in the future in Bruno. Chisel Planet, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Once again, like and subscribe for the FPL Creator Code. And a huge super chat from Marek. Thank you so much for the super chat. Hey, Fran, considering switching Nkunku to 5.5 midfielder and upgrading 4.5 defender to Munoz, okay, that makes sense. Keeping 0.5 in the bank for Isak to Watkins in the near future. Your thoughts and which 5.5 to pick? Love the content. 5.5 is an interesting one, right? I think that Mavididi is very interesting. If you're kind of buying into the narrative that he can be the starting centre forward for Leicester for the first 2 game weeks, and he could be the penalty taker as well, I think that's quite big. If you're not so high on Mavididi because you think that, okay, if they sign a forward, then that becomes sort of Mavididi less interesting as an option, then you always have an option, I think, of going for someone like Smith Rowe. I still think that Smith Rowe is the 5.5 option that I like the most between game weeks 1 to 5. So that's a pretty sort of good run of games for Fulham, just generally speaking. And if you want to do that, I'd probably go for that. What I've mentioned in the chat too is that I have been looking at lines where maybe I'm happy to drop, let's say, Haaland for Watkins and then go Saka to Salah within my own draft. So if that's something you're considering as well, that's quite interesting. And generally speaking, the 0.5 in the bank can also go in other positions. If you don't want to go for Watkins, you want to keep Isak for whatever reason, that also could be quite helpful within your draft structures. Anka as well with the super chat. Thank you so much. Good luck in the new season. Same to you. Andreas or Smith Rowe? I think Andreas is not necessarily on penalties because we know that Sasa Lukic has actually taken penalties in the preseason, and it's very likely that Lukic will actually play a big role for Fulham this season. So I think it's not fair to say that Andreas is still on penalties. As far as the Smith Rowe point, I think that he's more than likely going to be playing consistently advanced positions. With Andreas last season, we saw him as a bit more of a 10. In the preseason, however, we've seen that Andreas has dropped a little bit deeper in the pitch. So I really am a little bit cold on Andreas as an option. Plus, it also seems like Andreas has actually been rumored to potentially join Marseille as a transfer option there. So I would definitely go for Smith Rowe. John Wick says, hi, Fran. Start Nkunku or Joao Pedro, and Barco or Konsa. So I would probably start Nkunku once again, going with the home fixture in this situation, going the player who actually has played a lot of preseason minutes and should play a good amount of minutes versus Man City. As far as Barco or Konsa, I think it comes down to, once again, do you have a deep defense? For me, I have two premium defenders. I've got Porro and I've got Trent Alexander-Arnold. But I know that I have Kwanzaa, who's a little bit of a risk, which is why I don't really want to go Barco. But if you don't have any risks in your defense and you actually have a pretty strong defense and you think that you can still go for a 4.0 defender, then go for Barco. But otherwise, I'd just go for Kwanzaa. So many super chats that I've actually starting to miss. Ali, thank you for a super chat. I didn't see a message, Ali, but I will try to look out for a message if you have one. Otherwise, thank you so much. Salah says he couldn't stretch the Porro and was unsure on Robbo. Yeah, I think it's fine to be unsure on Robbo because it doesn't seem like Lazy FPL have actually produced any sort of news or potential leaks around that. So let me just quickly have a look at Lazy FPL once again, see if we actually get any other additional leaks. No, we just have Jota starting. We also had Ahmad starting, but potentially we'll get some more leaks over the next 19 minutes. I'm going to quickly have a look at some other social media platforms just to have a look at if there's actually any other potential leaks within our teams. Yeah, I don't really think that we have any other leaks. So sorry about that. Dan says, hi mate, bench Nkunku or Rodgers and why? I'd bench Rodgers. I think Rodgers clearly is playing versus the weaker team, but we also have to say that West Ham have actually bolstered themselves up quite a bit. Another thing too is that ultimately it's a home and away difference. This is a Man City team that's without Rodri, so anytime we get to hopefully play versus Man City without Rodri, I think that's a huge plus in terms of looking at how fragile I guess City is. I'm not saying that Chelsea are going to beat City. That's ridiculous. I think City will probably smash Chelsea if we're being honest. But do I think City can concede a goal? Absolutely, I think so. And ultimately, Nkunku is a player that I probably back a lot more than someone like Rodgers still. So considering all those things, I'd still go Nkunku. Han Cheng, thank you for your super chat. Doku versus Nkunku. Doku's a huge risk, but at the same time, Chelsea seems like a mess. I think whilst you can say that Chelsea seems like a mess, I think it's still we're still overplaying our hand in terms of saying how bad Chelsea is. I think when we think at the end of the season, I generally thought that Chelsea probably were the fourth best team in the league, and that includes Aston Villa being sort of moved out of the top four for me. But you can argue that once Enzo Maresca has come in, we haven't seen much in the preseason to really be happy about Chelsea. But what I will say is that it's I think a lot harder, I suppose, for Enzo to ruin what actually looked like a really good offense for the most part of last season, even when Chelsea looked like a mess last year, right? When Poch was probably struggling with a lot of results, I still think that Chelsea's baselines for their sort of underlying stats for attack were still really good. And Nkunku, I still view as a really good attacker, whereas Doku, I still think his minutes are a bit risky. And you also have to say that Doku as a profile is probably a little bit less goal dominant, a little bit more creative, but then also clearly lacks maybe, I guess, the finesse in the final third at the moment in time. I still personally prefer Nkunku because if you can get rid of, let's say, just the game week 1 aspect of Nkunku having a bad fixture, the reality is you probably want to have Nkunku game week 2 onwards by a far mile over someone like Doku, who can definitely have reduced minutes at any time. Because think about it, Grealish can play left wing and definitely start, and you can also still have Bernardo Silva starting at right wing, which means that Doku could find himself on the bench. And I don't think you really want to deal with that situation. Whereas Nkunku, for the most part, I still think is going to start most games. William, thank you for your super chat. Henderson, Fabianski, Trent, Porro, Kwanzaa, Konsa, Dunk, Eze, Gibbs, White, and Bumasaka, Smith Rowe, Hollanese. I think that's a very strong team. One thing I will say, though, is that I don't really love the double up of Nottingham Forest. I'd rather have a little bit rotation potentially, because what happens is when you hit game week 4, maybe the issue is that you have two players who are actually offensive players who are going to be facing off versus Liverpool, which is not ideal. Another thing, too, is I think I'm a little bit lower on Gibbs White now than I ever was, because if you look at the cheat sheet series, I've definitely downgraded Gibbs White once or twice. And the reason is because we've actually found out that he's lost set pieces during the preseason. Maybe that's wrong. maybe he'll somehow get preseason, get over that and actually just have set pieces anyways. But I find it very odd that he didn't take set pieces in the preseason. And suddenly we're talking about Gibbs White not being on set pieces, but then also being a transfer option as a 6.5 player. I'd probably not go Gibbs White. I'd rather go Nkunku personally. And that's the only change that I really suggest for this draft. Why Konsa over Mikolenko? As I was saying in the chat, I quite like that Konsa covers game weeks 3, 4, and 5 for my team, because I think if you look at Konsa, I suppose the issue with someone like Joao Konsa, that is from Liverpool, is that his fixtures are good for game weeks 4 and 5, but then he has a bad game week 3, and Porro has a bad game week 4. So generally speaking, I have a lack of depth around those windows, and I think Konsa has average to good games there, and he's a completely nailed player. Whereas with Mikolenko, Everton are probably a much better defense than Aston Villa, but he's got a great game in game week 3, but I would probably not say the same for game weeks 4 and 5. So I think it actually kind of evens out, but I generally prefer that Konsa is good depth for all the fixtures that I really want to have good depth in. And that's pretty much it. So thank you, William. Thank you, Ali. Leonard says Captain Salah or Isak. I'd go Salah if I had Salah, personally. Because I think the whole point of going for a Salah-only draft is that you're going for the Salah captaincies when everyone else on a Haaland-only draft is going for players like Isak, players like Saka, or players like Haaland. So you might as well take the full benefit of having Salah and captain Salah versus Ipswich away. OP Talent says Haaland, Solanke, or Gabriel / Guardiola and Muniz. I would probably actually go with Gabriel and Muniz. I still think that at the start of the season, what's nice about Gabriel is that I definitely think that he's still a starter for this Arsenal team. So that for me is not in contention. I would definitely go for Gabriel because the game weeks 1 and 3 fixtures are very good. You'd still be okay playing him in game week 2, and then ultimately Muniz is a very strong player between game weeks 1 to 5. So there's not even really a fixture specifically where you drop Muniz. So I like Muniz a lot. And that's sort of my thoughts on that. And Hall, his minutes could be a little bit dicey, so I'm a little bit lower on him than before. You can also start with Guardiola, though, because if you can ignore game week 1, the general run of games is quite good, bar game week 5. So it's really up to you. Another thing that's nice about Gabriel, I guess, if you start the season, is if you have Gabriel game weeks 1 to 3, you maybe can still go back to Robertson game week 4, and that's a really nice transfer option. Philip says, what do you think about Jacob Murphy? I think that when you look at the underlying stats for Jacob Murphy, career-wise, they're a little bit underwhelming. And so even though he's had a brilliant preseason, I don't think I'm suddenly just going to erase my entire understanding of a player because of preseason form, particularly when the preseason form was against a lot of Japanese teams, no offense to the J League. And that's sort of my take on Jacob Murphy. I think he's interesting. He's going to have an incredible amount of goal-scoring odds and assisting odds because he's actually a little bit more assistive as a player if you look at his just career stats. But yeah, I think that it's very likely that Newcastle, based on the sources that I'm reading from where like Newcastle reporters, is that they're still going for a right winger, even though the Almiron deal has closed down. And also his minutes can be a little bit more fragile. So I don't love Jacob Murphy that much. But if you're just concerned about game weeks 1 to 3, you're going for a shorter term window, I can't see why Jacob Murphy is a bad pick. Those Twins says Jota Diaz. Can you look at Discord at Dam's team? I can certainly have a look at Discord for Dam's team. Let me see. I can't really find Dam's team. Yeah, I can't. I mean, there's a lot of rate my teams in the Discord, so I can't necessarily find the team that you're referencing. I apologize, but if you can maybe shout out in the live chat what your Discord username is, or even send me a DM on Discord, go for it. Anish says Garnacho, if he starts, better than Bruno. I don't think so, no, because the reality is Bruno has penalties. Bruno has the full 90 minutes per game, and he's got set pieces. E7 says, have Gabriel / Porro. What two 4.5 million defenders should I get? I think you want to have a look at someone who covers Gabriel's probably bad game week 4, Porro's bad game week 4, someone's game week 2 as well, arguably speaking for Gabriel or Porro. So I kind of like Dunk, personally speaking, and even Konsa for those reasons. True Vandella says, hi boss, what 4.5 to forward for the bench? Seems like a lot of people are going for Jefferson right now, but I don't think Jefferson's going to get the minutes that we expect. A lot of the 4.5 forwards, unfortunately, are just completely dead options. I kind of want Jota and Havertz instead of Saka and Joao Pedro. Is this a mistake? I don't think it's a mistake, but once again, the reason why I have Saka in my team is that I plan to sort of move into someone like Mo Salah in game week 4 or game week 5. And that's pretty much why I've gone for those options. So it really comes down to if you don't see yourself going to Salah, if you don't see yourself sort of switching around with the premiums, like let's say just by holding Saka, I have the ability to move quite easily into someone like Phil Foden in the future. But if you don't go for someone like Saka in that position, it becomes a little bit more tough. You become, or you find yourself in the position that you have to use 2 free transfers to get to those sorts of players. So that's sort of why I've gone for Saka in my draft. Is it fine to go Jota and Havertz? Absolutely, it's fine to go Jota and Havertz. A random penguin says Gabriel to Konsa, then wings to Mavididi. I think you can definitely do that. If you prefer the depth that, let's say, having more attackers is going to provide to your team, totally fine. And I'm totally happy with those options. But it also means that arguably there's a pretty big drop off in defense, right? Because Gabriel's just an elite defender. Caleb, thank you so much for joining as a member of the channel. Welcome to Captain. Really appreciate you being around. 2,110 of you guys in the chat. Thank you guys for being here. Do like the stream and please subscribe if you're new here and you're looking for more FPL tips and advice. We do deadline streams every single week, but the cheat sheet series is what I'm proud of. So do feel free to have a look at that every single week before we jump onto the deadline streams, because it does give a lot of my thoughts on all the players in FPL. And it's not a series where you're just copying my team, but seriously, it is just trying to sort of assess the full landscape of FPL as best as I can for you managers. Salah says, out of Sells and Henderson, who should I start? I personally think that Henderson's a bit safer, because I think when you think about Henderson, it's very unlikely that he loses his starting spot in the team, whereas with Sells, I think he can definitely lose his spot in the team. Mr. Salt says, now that we know Jota starts, would you pick Jota or Gordon? I'd probably still go Jota. I think that Jota was always going to start, so my opinions on Jota Gordon have not changed. I generally like the sort of Jota run of games. Someone has sent me a Discord friend request, so let me just have a look at that. Damn, perfect. If you can just message me your team now, Damn. I think you have actually. So, Damn, I'm going to rate your team now. It's got Luis Diaz. Look, I've got to be honest and say that looking at Luis Diaz, I think my concern is that his minutes could be a little bit worse than we expect. But he's probably the only punt in your draft. I still prefer Jota just because if I can pick a centre forward over a left winger more often than not, unless it's Jared Bowen, I would. So I think the draft is lovely, bar that. I think you've actually got 3 premium defenders, so I can totally understand why you've gone for Barco instead. I think that's fine as well. You've got Arsenal defense to sort of cover the lack of Arsenal defense. But it's a really strong, well-rounded team. I guess the question I'd probably ask you is, what do you plan to do around some of the Haaland captaincies, right? Because this is a no Haaland draft. This is also a no Salah draft. So, on game week 2, for example, what are you going to do for captaincies there? On game week, maybe let's say 5, for example, as well. What are you going to do for captaincies there? So I think that's what I don't love about the draft, because right now, without Phil Foden being in place, it's hard for a nomium draft to actually capture the game week 2 and 5 captaincies really well. And that's sort of my thought on your team. Luke says, is it too weak to start 5.5 million options per week? I don't think so. I think we actually have some really good 5.5 million options in the game. Like, as I said, Joao Pedro in a good fixture is absolutely an incredible pick. The same goes for someone like Smith Rowe, who generally has a great run of games. Mavididi, as you can see, he can start the season as a center forward and be on penalties. So that's really insane. Players like Minte have really good underlying stats, even from other leagues. And even if you apply a little bit of, let's say, Eredivisie tax onto Minte, he's still a great player. Ben Brereton Diaz last season played for a really, really poor offense in Sheffield United and still actually had incredible underlying stats and was still a very, very sort of efficacious player. So I have no issues with some of the 5.5s. If you think that the sacrifice is worth it, and maybe it's because you're going for 5.5s to go a Haaland plus Salah draft, I think that makes a lot of sense. So that's sort of my thoughts on those teams. I've just got news that Jonas, the FPL champion, by the way, is potentially in the stream chat. Say hi to Jonas as well and congratulate him for being our winner for 23-24 FPL. Now firmly a legend of the game. Is Son for captaincy bad for game week 1? I don't actually think it's bad. But once again, I tentatively speaking, I like home games better than away games. So yeah, that's why I'd rather go Saka for the most part between game weeks 1 to 3 over someone like Son. And for the same reason, I would definitely go for Isak as a home captaincy as well. But he's not a bad captaincy at all. And I think ultimately, if you think that Son actually has penalties, then Son is a lot closer as an option to Saka. But if you suddenly think that Solanke actually has a decent amount of pen share, and you're concerned about that too, then Son also becomes a little bit of a worse pick. John says, in your opinion, why Pedro over Woods? Well, first of all, there's a 0.5 million cost saving. Second of all, I'd probably say that Woods and Pedro suffer from the same issue, right? Between game weeks 1 to 5, Woods has one bad fixture, which is Liverpool away. And then Joao Pedro also has a bad fixture, which is Arsenal away. And so I think that's very similar. Joao Pedro has the benefit of definitely being the penalty taker of the team. Woods, unfortunately, we're still unclear whether Morgan Gibbs-White takes penalties or whether Woods takes penalties. I personally actually think that Woods is likely to take because he just has a stellar record, even though Gibbs-White has been taking previously for Nottingham Forest. But there's still uncertainty there, which is why I still like Joao Pedro. I'd also say that despite Wood actually have amazing underlying stats, Joao Pedro also himself has really good underlying stats and also plays with a better offense. So because the fixtures are, generally speaking, close, I'd probably back the better attacker, in my opinion, which is going to be Joao Pedro, as long as he's able to actually play the fixtures. Who's the penalty taker for Bournemouth? Right now, it seems like the penalty taker could be Kluivert, but we know that they're also close to signing Evan Nilsson, and Evan Nilsson will probably take penalties away from someone like Kluivert, so I don't think that it doesn't make too much sense to just go for Kluivert on that basis. And also, we know that Kluivert's minutes are not perfect. Big Bad Flanner says, thoughts on Bergvall for 4.5. I think Bergvall has actually definitely impressed a lot of Spurs fans in the preseason, right? And I think a lot of them are calling for him to permanently start. But if you look at Ange and his sort of career so far to date, I think he does have a lot of preference to playing some of the more veteran players in the team. And I don't see Bergvall as being a consistent starter. Whereas with Winks, you can say that he's on set pieces for a very bad team, let's be honest. But he's going to play 90 minutes per game most of the games, and he's going to start. So I think with Winks, you don't really have any of the cons of, let's say, Bergvall missing games potentially, being on the bench at times. And so I think Winks just makes a lot more sense as a 4.5 pick because you only have a 4.5 pick really to be an auto sub option. There's nothing more to it. And Winks still has the potential to maybe get a small, tiny little haul. If you guys remember Harrison Reed a couple seasons ago, he's kind of like Winks. But Winks obviously plays a little bit more offensive, has some set pieces, which is even better. Going back to the live chat, let's have a look. 2,100 of you guys here. Thank you guys so much for listening to me yap about FPL. Why not Ben Johnson over Eze? Vladimir, you're absolutely trolling my brother. Why you're not keen on Solanke? I'm not keen on Solanke. It's just that I'd rather spend some of the money in some of the guaranteed picks for me in terms of someone like Bruno, who I think is definitely on penalties, versus someone like Solanke, who I think has lost penalties by moving clubs. A member of the channel has joined, Arbian. Thank you so much for joining as a member of the channel. If I've actually misspelled or sort of mispronounced your name, please feel free to let me know the correct pronunciation. Thank you. Is Mosquera starting for Wolves, and is he a good fifth defender if he is? First of all, I have to say that if you have a Wolves center back, right, what is the value of a Wolves center back? I think that they're unfortunately one of the worst defenses in the league. And I think they're also prime candidates for relegation. So even though Mosquera can start every single game, do we really like him at all? Is he any better than someone like Harwood Bellis? I would probably say no, but you can maybe make the counterpoint that still Wolves is a better team than Southampton or Ipswich on the defensive point of view. So if you want to make that point, I think that's fine. Mosquera makes sense, but I don't really like any of the 4.0s unless it's Barco. And even for Barco, I think we know that there's some risks attached to Barco, right? I'm not saying that Barco will suddenly become the second choice player because I think he's actually a high quality player. And a lot of Brighton fans would attest to this already. Plus, he also has set pieces, which is something that none of the other 4.0s can really say that they have. But that's sort of my thoughts on that. Abdullah says, Barco with Wood or Joao with Dunk? I personally would prefer Joao with Dunk. And this is for me in a Kwanzaa draft, because I think with Kwanzaa, you can argue that Kwanzaa's minutes can definitely reduce over time. And you can even argue that Barco's minutes will reduce over time as well when Estupiñán is fit. So that's why I prefer Joao Pedro with Dunk. And the same, as I said, well, the same logic between Joao Pedro and Wood. If you're going for Wood game weeks 1 to 3, he's clearly better than Joao Pedro. But if the plan is to go for Joao Pedro for at least game weeks 1 to 5, then you know that you're going to get the good fixtures for Joao Pedro, which is going to be game weeks 4 and 5. And with Wood, you're also going to have to deal with the bad fixture, which is game week 4 versus Liverpool away. And then, of course, another decent fixture in game week 5. So generally speaking, between, let's say, Joao Pedro and Wood, I'd say that both of them have one very clear bad fixture and one player is clearly on penalty. So I still prefer Joao Pedro in most situations. Oh my God, we're so close to the deadline, guys. Wishing you a great season. Hope you in the top 10. Thank you so much, Anish. Welcome, Anders, as well. Guys, please make your moves. We're literally running out of time. I don't even know how it got down to this, but we're about to lock in. I've totally lost track of time, and that's it. Is the website down? I feel like it's down early, though. It's not even 30 past. Is the website down? Okay, I need a double, triple check if my team is actually correct. I'm stressed. I hope my team's correct. I don't even know what my team is. Let me take a screenshot. I don't know what my team is. I'm getting stressed. It crashed. Typical FPL. I know it's 30 past. 8.5 million players this year is awesome. Jason G joins as a member of the channel once again for 4 months. Thank you. Says down. There we land. I feel like the website went down before .30. Fran, you're my father. Sarah, I don't have a daughter, so yeah, it's not happening. Bobby Mo, time over. Saying Fran, it's so scary. I can't remember what my team is. I've been yapping too much in the chat. Do I have Bentley as my goalkeeper? I don't even know. You looked at it enough. It will be okay. Yeah, but I didn't get to take a screenshot of my team though. This is bad news. How am I supposed to make a tweet about it? Oh well. We're locked in, guys, and we get to watch Man United play football, which is not necessarily a pro. Porro bench for Archie Gray confirmed. Okay. That's an interesting one. Oh, FPL friend to win FPL this season. Yeah, that's not. I hope that happens, but let's see. Rewind the stream. We'll find out. I don't know why Guardiola's transfer's done. Is the app glitched and not showing the players? Yeah, so what happens with FPL is you have to wait probably 30 minutes to actually wait for your team to reset. So this is the first game week of the season. I imagine it'll take extra time. We can definitely screenshot the VOD. You've got Bentley as goalkeeper. Fair play. Have I missed any super chats? Hopefully not. Don't think I have. But thank you guys so much for being in the chat. Once again, subscribe to the channel if you're new here and if you've enjoyed the stream. Thank you to all the new members. Thank you to the people who've actually sent in super chats. And in general, thank you, the live chat as well, for just being extremely supportive. Why 3 forwards instead of 5 mids? I think this season, I just prefer some of the 5.5 forwards to the 5.5 midfielders. So that was sort of the value choice there. All right. Well, whilst I stare at this error has occurred stream, I have to probably switch gears. Unfortunately, I'm on vacation. So I'll see you guys, and I hope you guys take care. But have a wonderful time with watching some football. I will be there definitely for the games. And yeah, we'll catch you guys for some of the content next week. Take care once again, and enjoy your weekends as much as possible. So